I thought I could save him, but I lost myself instead. That line used to sound like something out of a sad movie. But now it feels like my life's headline. My truth. My scar. I met Ethan on a warm September night in Austin. He had that kind of magnetic energy, the kind that pulls you in before you even know what's happening. Messy hair, this sly half-smile, and eyes that burned with this wild, chaotic joy. We were at a friend's backyard bonfire, and he made everyone laugh like he was born to perform. When he looked at me, it was like I was the only one there. And when he kissed me, too soon, too bold, it felt like stepping into a hurricane. He drank whiskey that night. Straight. No chase. I remember thinking it was kind of sexy. Reckless. Confident. I laughed when he poured another. He winked at me and said, "I only drink to feel alive."
God, I didn't know what that really meant back then.
We fell fast. Too fast. But it felt right. He'd show up with flowers, blast music in the car, sing terribly and off-key, and we'd drive with the windows down like we were the stars of our own indie film. He called me his anchor, said I made him feel grounded. He made me feel wanted. Chosen. In the beginning, the drinking was just part of the fun. Weekend parties, rooftop bars, late-night bottles of wine while tangled in bedsheets and laughter. I didn't see the warning signs, or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to ruin the dream. There was the time he missed my sister's graduation because he overslept, but his friend later told me they'd been drinking until 4 a.m. Or when he showed up to dinner with my parents smelling like beer, trying to act sober while slurring his words. I laughed it off. Told him he was just tired. Covered for him. That was the beginning of me becoming his shield.
His alibi.
At first, I thought I was being loyal. Supportive. What love is supposed to look like, right? Ride or die. But deep down, a part of me was already afraid. I just didn't know it yet. I kept telling myself, he's just going through a rough patch, or he's not like the others, he's got a good heart. And he did. I'm not saying he didn't. That's the part that messes with you. Ethan wasn't a monster. He was charming, broken, and so full of pain, he didn't know where to put it, so he poured it into a bottle. And I let him pour it into me too.
Because I thought love meant staying.
Even when it started to hurt. Even when I began to disappear. People think when love starts to fall apart, it's loud, screaming matches, slamming doors, broken glass on the floor. But with Ethan, it was quiet. The first time I truly felt something shift, we were at this cozy restaurant for our 6-month anniversary. I had gotten dressed up, heels, lipstick, the whole thing, and he showed up already buzzed. His smile was just a little too wide, his laugh a little too loud, and his words, off.
Sloppy.
I ordered pasta. He ordered 3 drinks before the appetizers even arrived. When I gently touched his hand and whispered, "Hey, maybe slow down a bit?" He pulled away like I'd slapped him. "What? Are you my mom now?" he snapped. Jesus, can I enjoy myself without getting judged? I remember how my heart sank. I wanted to cry, but I smiled instead. Made a joke. Changed the subject. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. He was tired.
Stressed.
Maybe he hadn't eaten enough. I always had a reason. An excuse. The thing about loving an addict is that you become a professional justifier. You get so good at explaining their behavior, to your friends, your family, yourself, that you start to forget what normal even looks like. He started disappearing for whole nights. Said he was crashing at a buddy's, or just needed space. He'd turn off his phone. Come back with glassy eyes and a hollow smile, acting like nothing had happened. And every time I let it go, because when he was sober, he could still be amazing. He'd write me little notes, make me breakfast in bed, talk about our future like it was some beautiful, sacred thing. "I'm gonna get clean," he'd whisper into my neck after we made love.
You and me, babe.
I swear. And I believed him. Every time. I started keeping track. How many days he stayed sober. I'd praise him, reward him, try to build him up like he was climbing some invisible mountain. I became part girlfriend, part cheerleader, part nurse. I researched alcoholism late at night when he was passed out. I read books. I joined online forums. I thought if I just understood it enough, I could fix it. But that's the trap. That's how you lose yourself. Because every time he slipped, I took it personally. Like I hadn't loved him hard enough. Like I hadn't done enough to keep him from falling. I remember this one night. He was drunk, and I found him sitting in the shower with all his clothes on. The water was freezing, and he just kept saying over and over, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I wrapped him in towels, held his head against my chest, whispered, "It's okay, I'm here, I've got you." But inside, I was shattering. Because I didn't want to be his mother, or his savior. I wanted to be his partner. And I couldn't even find myself in the mirror anymore. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't just wake up one day and realize you're scared of the person you love. It creeps in like fog rolling under a door. Silent. Subtle. And by the time you notice, it's already wrapped around everything. Ethan started turning mean. Not all the time. Just enough to make me question if it was really happening. That's the thing, the abuse didn't start with fists. It started with sighs, rolled eyes, and sharp words that cut in ways I didn't see coming. "You're overreacting. God, can you just shut up? You're so sensitive, it's exhausting." At first, I argued back. Then I started staying quiet. Then I started agreeing with him. And that's when he knew he had me. The drinking got worse. He'd come home reeking of liquor, stumbling, slurring. I'd help him to bed, undress him, clean up his mess. He never said thank you. He'd just groan or pass out. Some nights, he'd mutter cruel things under his breath. Other nights, he'd cry in my arms like a child. I started walking on eggshells, constantly scanning his mood, adjusting my words, my tone, my body language. I became a master at predicting his outbursts before they happened. But no matter how carefully I tiptoed, it was never enough. He began accusing me of things, flirting with coworkers, lying about where I was, trying to control him. It didn't matter what I said, he didn't believe me. He'd go through my phone, demand to know passwords, show up at my job just to check in. One night, after I asked him to stop drinking in front of my nieces at a family barbecue, he pulled me aside and said, "Don't ever humiliate me like that again." His grip on my arm left a bruise. I wore long sleeves for a week, even in the heat. But when he was sober, he'd act like nothing ever happened. Like we were still the perfect couple. And when I tried to bring up the things he'd said or done, he'd twist it. "You're crazy. You're making things up. You're the one with the problem." That's when I started to doubt myself. My memory. My sanity. I began recording conversations on my phone just to play them back to myself and hear what really happened. I was slipping, emotionally drowning, but I kept smiling for the outside world. Because who would believe me? He wasn't a monster. He didn't hit me in front of people. He still posted pictures of us on Instagram with cute captions. Still told me he loved me. And sometimes, in his good moments, I still loved him too. But more than anything, I was scared. Scared of him. Scared of what I'd become. And scared of what would happen if I left. There's a kind of silence that comes right before everything breaks. It's not peaceful. It's heavy. Charged. Like the air knows something awful is about to happen. That night started like any other. Ethan came home drunk, late. I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I'd learned it was better not to engage when he was like that. But he didn't let it go. He stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, his keys still in his hand. "You ignoring me now?" he slurred. I didn't answer. I just stayed still, hoping he'd pass out on the couch like usual. But he didn't. He walked over to my side of the bed and yanked the covers off me. "Get up," he snapped. "We need to talk." My heart was racing, but I stayed calm. "Ethan, please. You're drunk. We can talk in the morning." Wrong answer. He lost it. He started yelling, calling me names, accusing me of cheating, screaming that I thought I was better than him. I backed away, trying to move past him, but he blocked the door. Then he shoved me. Hard. I stumbled and hit the dresser, my elbow catching the corner. The pain shot at my arm, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just froze. Because this was new. This wasn't emotional abuse. This wasn't just words. This was real. Physical. Dangerous. His chest was heaving, eyes bloodshot, hands balled into fists. And for the first time, I looked at him and didn't see the man I fell in love with. I saw a stranger. I saw someone who could hurt me, maybe worse, and not even realize it until the next day. I don't know how long we stood there. Eventually, he turned and punched the wall so hard it cracked the drywall. Then he stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the shelf. And I collapsed to the floor. I sat there for what felt like hours, shaking, barely breathing. I stared at the dent in the wall, the shattered frame on the floor, the blood on my elbow. And all I could think was, how did I get here? The worst part? The next morning, he brought me flowers. He cried. Told me he didn't remember. Said he'd never forgive himself. Promised he'd quit drinking.
Begged me to stay. Said he needed me.
And I stayed. God help me, I stayed. Because I still thought maybe, just maybe, if I loved him hard enough, it wouldn't happen again. They say hope is the last thing to die. I used to think that was beautiful. Now I think it's dangerous. After that night, the shove, the wall, the blood, things got quiet for a while. Ethan was on his best behavior. He didn't drink for 2 weeks. 2 whole weeks. He cooked dinner, left little notes on the mirror, told me I was his world. He downloaded a sobriety app, bought a journal, even went to one AA meeting. I clung to that. To every tiny shred of proof that he was changing. I told myself the worst was behind us. That love wins. That good people make mistakes, and if you stand by them, they'll rise. He just needed support. He just needed me. I was lying to myself. But I was so deep in it, I didn't know how to stop. It's strange how quickly you can normalize dysfunction. I became addicted to the cycle. The pain, the apology, the promise, the relief. I lived for the moments where he was kind again, where he kissed my forehead and said, I don't know what I'd do without you. Because when things were good, they were so good. But the good never lasted. One Friday night, I came home from work to find him sitting on the couch with a bottle of vodka in his hand. No glass. Just drinking it straight, like water. His eyes were already glossy. I froze. He looked at me and said, I tried. I really did. But it's not that easy. Then he laughed. Not a happy laugh, a hollow one. The kind that makes your stomach twist. All the progress gone. Just like that. He spent that weekend in a haze. I cleaned up his vomit. I turned down an invite from my best friend because I didn't want anyone to see the bags under my eyes. I lied to my mom about why I hadn't called her in days. I didn't want anyone to know. Because if they knew, they'd tell me to leave. And I wasn't ready to hear that. Because leaving meant admitting it wasn't going to get better. It meant letting go of the version of him I had built in my head, the charming, funny, passionate man I fell in love with. The one who used to send me playlists and call me his person. But that version was fading, blurring, replaced by someone I didn't recognize anymore. Still, I kept saying, it's just a rough patch. I said it so many times it became a reflex. But deep down I knew, this wasn't a rough patch. This was my life now. And I didn't know how to escape it. You don't just lose yourself all at once. It happens in layers. First, I stopped seeing my friends. I was always too tired or busy with work. But the truth was, I didn't want to lie to their faces anymore. I didn't want them to see through the smile I'd practiced so carefully in the mirror. Then I stopped doing the things I used to love, yoga in the mornings, journaling, weekend hikes, spontaneous road trips. It all started to feel pointless. Like I didn't have the right to joy anymore. Like I had to earn it by fixing him first. My world became so small. Just Ethan and his moods. His drinking. His apologies. His chaos. I was either cleaning up after it or bracing for the next storm. There was no room for me anymore. I remember staring at myself one morning while brushing my teeth. My skin looked dull. My eyes were tired, hollow. I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. I whispered, "What are you doing?" But I didn't have an answer. And then came the moment I'll never forget. My best friend, Bree, showed up at my door. Unannounced. It had been months since I'd seen her. She was holding iced coffee and wearing this worried look that she tried to hide with a tight smile. "I've been texting," she said softly. "You okay?" I let her in. We sat on the couch. Ethan was at work. Or maybe he wasn't. Honestly, I didn't even know anymore. Or care. We made small talk at first. She told me about her new job, her dog, her weekend plans. Then she got quiet, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're not okay. And I think you're scared to admit how bad it's gotten." I felt my throat tighten. My first instinct was to deflect, to tell her she was overreacting, that she didn't understand. But I couldn't do it. Instead, I started crying. The kind of cry that shakes your whole body, the kind you can't stop once it starts.
She held my hand, didn't say much.
Just let me fall apart in front of her for the first time in what felt like forever. I told her everything. The yelling, the drinking, the shove, the broken promises, the bruise I covered with makeup. And she didn't say, "You need to leave." She just said, "You don't deserve this." Those words hit harder than anything, because somewhere deep inside, I'd forgotten that truth. I had buried it beneath years of emotional gymnastics and survival mode. You don't deserve this. And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe it. Just a little. Relapses feel like betrayal. Even when you know they're coming. Even when you expect them. It had been almost a month since Ethan's last drink, at least as far as I knew. He'd been going to meetings sporadically, white-knuckling his way through the days, snapping at little things but managing to stay dry. I was holding my breath the entire time, terrified to say the wrong thing, terrified to be hopeful. That weekend, we were supposed to go to a wedding. Friends of mine from college, people who hadn't seen me in years. I'd bought a new dress, booked a hotel. I thought maybe, we could just have one night. One normal night. He promised me he wouldn't drink. He looked me dead in the eyes that morning and said, "I got this, babe. I want to be someone you're proud of." I wanted so badly to believe him. We made it through the ceremony. He was sober, quiet but polite. He held my hand during the vows, whispered a joke in my ear, and for a moment, I let myself pretend we were okay. But at the reception, the switch flipped. It was one toast, one glass of champagne. He said he was just holding it for someone. But then he took a sip. Then another. Then it spiraled. Within an hour, he was drunk.
Loud.
Embarrassing. Telling crude jokes to strangers, spilling wine on the tablecloth, starting arguments with the groom's brother over music or politics. I couldn't even keep up. I tried to pull him aside, tried to calm him down, but he waved me off. "Don't start with me," he hissed. "You're always ruining everything." People were watching. Whispers.
Eyes.
Judgment. I wanted to disappear. Eventually, I had to drive us back to the hotel. He was belligerent the whole way, yelling, slurring, accusing me of flirting with someone at our table. I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel, counting every mile, praying he'd pass out. But he didn't. He exploded. The second I unlocked the hotel room, he shoved me inside and slammed the door. He screamed about the wedding, about me, about how I didn't support him, how everything was my fault. I stood there, trembling, afraid to move. And then he punched a hole in the wall, right next to my head. I don't know how I stayed calm. I grabbed my purse, my phone, and walked out without a word. Down the hallway into the elevator, out into the night air. I didn't even put on shoes. I sat on the curb outside that hotel, barefoot, shaking, mascara streaked across my cheeks. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was scared. Truly scared. And more than anything, I was done. Something in me cracked open that night. A voice I hadn't heard in years whispered, "This is not love. This is survival. And you're not surviving anymore. Leaving isn't a single moment. It's 100 quiet decisions before you even pack a bag." The next morning, I checked out of the hotel without waking Ethan. He was passed out on the bed, half-dressed, mouth open, snoring like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't terrified me. Like he hadn't screamed in my face and punched a wall inches from my head. I stared at him one last time. Not with love, not with anger. Just numb. I drove home alone. hands trembling on the steering wheel, windows down, music off. I couldn't cry. I couldn't think. I just needed space. Quiet. Something that didn't involve walking on eggshells or pretending everything was okay. I texted Bree when I got home. I think I'm done. I mean it this time. She called me immediately. I didn't even say hello. I just started sobbing the second I heard her voice. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't push. She just said, "Okay. Then let's figure out what comes next." That one sentence changed everything. Over the next few days, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started making a plan for me. Not for us. Not for Ethan. For me. I opened a new savings account and moved what little money I could. I looked up apartments, even though the idea of living alone terrified me. I started writing down everything. The manipulation, the fights, the times he threatened me, the promises he broke. I needed to see it all in one place. I needed the truth in black and white, because my mind had been a fog of denial for so long. And then, I waited. Waited for the right moment. Waited for him to be sober, calm, clear-headed, just enough for me to say the words and not be interrupted, not be gaslit or guilt or begged into staying. It happened on a Thursday. We were eating takeout on the couch. He was talking about some movie we should watch that weekend, like nothing had happened at the wedding. Like I hadn't slept in a separate apartment the past few nights.
And I just said it.
I'm leaving. He blinked.
Laughed.
Thought I was joking. I'm serious, I said. This isn't working. I'm not safe. I'm not happy. I can't do this anymore. And just like that, his face changed. The charm fell off. His smile vanished. I braced for impact.
But he didn't yell.
He didn't throw anything. He just said, "You'll come back. You always do." I didn't answer. Because he was wrong. This time I wouldn't. You think walking out the door is the hardest part. It's not. The hardest part is waking up alone in that new apartment, surrounded by boxes and silence, and fighting the urge to call him, to check if he's okay, to explain yourself, to go back. I moved out 2 days after that final conversation. Bree helped me pack. She brought boxes, snacks, and zero judgment. I kept waiting for the tears, for the big emotional breakdown, but it never came, just this quiet, heavy ache, like grief without a body. He didn't try to stop me. No grand gesture.
No flowers. No desprite palegi.
Just one message. You'll regret this. I hope you're happy now. It gutted me, not because I believed it, but because he did. Because in his mind, I was the villain. The one who gave up. The one who walked away. He didn't see what I'd sacrificed. What I'd endured. The parts of myself I'd buried just to keep us alive. But I did. I felt it in every shaky breath I took in that tiny new apartment. In the way I flinched at sudden noises. In the nightmares. In the moments I found myself reaching for my phone to text him and then stopped. I started therapy. I journaled every single day. I forced myself to take walks even when I didn't want to. I sat in the sun. I cried in the shower. I said no to people who drained me. I said yes to silence. The healing wasn't pretty. There was no light bulb moment. No instant freedom. Just slow, hard, messy days of unraveling all the lies I had told myself about love, about loyalty, about what I deserved. One night, a few weeks after I left, I found one of his old t-shirts buried in my laundry. I held it for a second, my chest tight, my throat closing, and then I walked it straight to the trash. Because I didn't want memories anymore. I wanted peace. And every day, I was choosing it. Even when it hurt. Even when it would have been easier to go back. Healing isn't some neat little timeline. It's not a checklist or a clean slate. It's messy. Uneven. Some days you feel strong, like maybe you've finally turned a corner, and the next day, one old song or photo can rip the scab wide open. But here's what I learned. You don't have to be fully healed to start living again. You just have to keep choosing you. At first, I didn't even know what that meant. My therapist asked me, "What do you want? Just for yourself?" And I sat there in silence, staring at the floor, because I didn't know how to answer. I had spent so many years wrapped around someone else's needs, moods, addictions. I forgot what I liked. What made me laugh. What made me me. So I started small. I bought myself flowers, not because anyone was watching, but because I wanted color in my apartment. I cooked food Ethan never liked, but I always craved. I played music he used to mock. I read books late into the night. I stayed out with friends and didn't worry about getting angry texts. For the first time in years, my phone was quiet. No panique. No walking on eggshells. No one demanding to know where I was. That silence? It felt like oxygen. And in that space, I started hearing myself again. Not the scared version of me. Not the woman who made excuses or whispered apologies just to keep the peace.
But the real me.
The one who used to dream big. Who laughed loudly. Who believed she was worth something. One morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror. No makeup, messy hair, coffee in hand, and I smiled. A real, honest smile. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was still standing. And that, after everything, was enough. I used to think that letting go meant failure. That leaving meant I had given up too soon, hadn't tried hard enough, hadn't loved him enough. But now I know the truth. Leaving was the bravest thing I've ever done. Because I didn't just walk away from a man. I walked away from the version of myself that accepted fear as normal. That believed love meant fixing someone who didn't want to be fixed. That thought my worth was measured by how much pain I could endure. I don't hate Ethan. I don't even blame him. Addiction is a disease, a brutal, soul-eating monster that steals people from the inside out. But love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself to the fire in hopes they'll find their way out. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is step away. There's grief in that. But there's also freedom. Real freedom. The kind where you don't flinch when a door closes too hard. Where you don't hold your breath waiting for the next outburst. Where you don't have to explain bruises with fake stories or cry silently in the bathroom with the water running. I've learned that love isn't supposed to hurt like that. It's not supposed to make you smaller. It's not supposed to erase who you are. And if you're listening to this, if you've seen yourself in my story, I want you to know something. You're not crazy. You are not weak. And you are not alone. Loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. Addiction is a disease, yes, but enabling it is not love. If you're drowning while trying to save someone else, let go.
Breathe.
You deserve to live. Loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. Addiction is a disease, but enabling it is not love. If you're drowning while trying to save someone else, let go.
Breathe.
You deserve peace. You deserve you. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And please never forget your worth. Subscribe for more stories that speak the truth, the ones most people are afraid to tell. Thank you for listening.